Hello! Welcome to the first video in the Intro to Python for Marketers series. I know it's been a long time coming, but I've been a little busy with things, and I wanted to make sure that I got this as right as I could get it. The next video, I'll kind of wait for a bit of feedback from people before I shoot it. But this one is going to be really short and sweet. First thing you need to do, if you haven't did it already, is install Python. And if you head over to DATABOI.com and go to playlists, you'll see a setup playlist and just pick whatever machine you're on and run through the setup. Next thing you need to do is head over to GitHub. Link is in the description. Head over to GitHub and download this notebook that we're going to be working with. And basically, once you've opened a notebook in the way that I've showed you in the setup videos, you should be where I am right now with what's in front of you and ready to go. So just a quick breakdown of what this is. As I said, it's going to be short and sweet. It's basically just going to show you how to open a file, how to look at the data in an aggregated way. It's a nice simple way to understand the data, and then how to set indexes. Another thing you need to do, I just forgot to mention this, you need to head over to kaggle.com, which is a data science competition website. And there's a data set over there that you need to download, but everything is in the notebook. So you can just kind of click on a link in the notebook, download the data set, and you'll be ready to rock and roll. So let's start. First thing you've always got to do whenever you're using notebooks in Python and doing any sort of data analysis in Python is you've got to import the module that you're planning on using. So in this case, we're only going to be using Pandas. Just to give you a little breakdown about Pandas. Pandas is essentially Excel for Python, but it goes faster and you can make sexier graphs with it. So it handles text data, it handles random other information like text and number data. It will handle number data as well. You'll be able to sort things, filter things, and we'll go through that in the next coming videos. But essentially Pandas is Excel, and if you remember that, you'll be fine. And the first thing you need to do is import Pandas. So whenever you're using a module for Python, you're going to have to import it. So in this case, it's Pandas. So you just type import pandas as PD. So the as PD bit is essentially, it's an abbreviation of a prefix. So sometimes when you call Panda functions, you're going to have to use a PD. So the notebook in Python knows that you're referring to the Panda module. Hopefully that makes sense. So we've imported Pandas. Nice and simple. So we just go import pandas as PD and we'll run that. We didn't get any errors after hitting that, so that means that it's pretty much running. And the next thing you're going to have to do is actually open up some data. So when you're dealing with Python, you usually call it loading data or opening data as you would normally do in Excel. We're going to try use Python terminology. So you're loading in the data. There's a couple of data sets we can use. There's live.csv and there's mostbacked.csv. I'm just going to use mostbacked.csv. And to open or load in a data set into Python, you give it it's a variable, right? So you're going to call it a variable, and I've named this variable poorly or not. KS, so Kickstarter, MB, most backed data equals, and now this is when we're starting to use Python. So it's pd.read_csv, and then in this red bit here, you put the location of the file. So in this case, I've got it in a folder called data, Kickstarter data, and most backed, then most backed.csv. So that's what that's doing. It's looking for the path of the file that you're going to open. And next, there's a little comma here. So that says, right, you've got the path of the file. What's the next bit? So we're going to talk about the separators. So it's a comma separated file. So we don't always need to specifically state that it's going to be a comma, and particularly in this case. So if I ran this, I'd get no errors. But just to keep things, sep. This is why I don't live type. I'm terrible at it. If you put in sep, it's separator, and this could be a space. It could be any other sort of delimiter, as long as that is the way the CSV file is actually delimited. So hopefully that's clear. If not, you can always ask questions in the comments. And I've just created this little statement here with emojis just to see if you could use emojis in notebooks, and you can. And essentially what we're going to do is just print a statement saying, and we've did it already, but essentially saying if everything's loaded, if there's no errors, it should print all the data is loaded, and then bang, bang, bang. And it did that. So if we run that again, there we go. It did it. There was no errors. That means the data is actually loaded, and we can move on. So the first method that we're going to use, the first tool we're going to use in the Pandas toolbox, is the .info method. And what it essentially does is it gives you a very top level breakdown of the data. Like, assume that you were just given a data set by somebody, you roughly knew where it came from, but you didn't know anything like the size of the data, how many columns it had in it, what types of information was in the columns. What this does is nicely aggregates that all into a little table. So here we've got KSMB KSMB data. I'm really regretting calling it that now. .info, and then these little brackets, and you have to have those to be able to make the table as pretty as it is. And if you just, so we call the variable, which is our data, and then we put .info at the end, and it will run. We run it, and it will load this for you. And it gives you a breakdown of all the columns and their names, how many columns, how many rows of data is in the file. So that's 4,000. How many are non-null? That basically means how many are empty, essentially, or not empty. And then the type of data, and that one's really important to look at because you're going to have to know if it's an integer. So an integer is a whole number, or a float, a decimal point number, or an object, which could be a bit of text. It could be special characters and numbers mixed together. It's essentially anything that isn't a float or an integer. You don't need to worry about this int 64-bit just now. That's quite advanced stuff for later on. So here we have a bit of an understanding of the types of data that we have, how much data we've got, how much is missing, and the names of the columns. So we're going to go on to the next method that's quite useful. And you'll find in the notebooks that we can pretty much do the same process every time. Even if we know the data, it's worth just checking it and making sure it is the same as the data was the last time you looked at it. So this is a describe function, and it essentially takes, it gives you a statistical breakdown of all the numeric data in your file. So in this case, we only have 4 columns, which are numeric data. Unnamed is one of them. Amount pledged, I'm assuming that's what it is. Goal and number of backers. And it gives you the statistical breakdown, so it gives you the mean, the standard deviation, the minimum number that's appearing, the maximum number that's appearing, and then the percentiles going 25, 50%, and 75%. You don't always, unless you're about to do a lot of statistical work on your data, which isn't always the case. You might not use a lot of that information, but it's good to have there. Definitely to know the max and the means, and the mins, the max, means, and mins. But it's just useful to have there, just again, to query the data, make sure that it's accurate. Next, we're going to use the method head. Now, this is the first time we've actually visualized the data. So we're going to just essentially draw a table. And head is, as it sounds, it gives you the head of the data. It gives you the first 5 rows from the data, which also include the column names. So if we run this, we get this table. So you shouldn't get any errors. It should just pump out this table. If you need to see more than the first 5, just enter in here, 15. Maybe you just need to get a good understanding. Maybe in a situation where I've did this in the past, essentially I've opened a file and it's had a lot of missing data at the top. So I didn't really know what data was what or what it looked like. So we could run 15 and it will give us the first 15 rows in the data that we can scroll through. So essentially this is the first time they've actually visualized the data. So we want to actually have a look at it. So let's look at unnamed. It basically looks like it's counting up per row, which is also very similar to the index next to it. So this bolded series of numbers going down the left hand side, they are the index. So Python has automatically, or Pandas has automatically set an index for your data set. It might not be the ideal one that you need just now, but it's did it just so your data stays in a certain order. And next it looks like that potentially unnamed was an index at some point, but as it follows exactly the Python index before. Amount pledged looks like it is a float, or it definitely is a float, but it looks like it probably could be just an integer because it all ends on .0. Blurb, by, category, currency, location are all objects because they are all text and strings. Number backers tier and pledge tier are also objects. I know they contain numbers, but they also contain special characters like square brackets and commas. So that means it's an object. It's essentially treat it like text. Same goes for title and URL, all objects. Number of backers is an integer, and goal is also a float, but again probably could be set to be an integer. So that's the first time we've looked at the data. It's nothing too unsurprising there, I don't think. So I think we go back to indexes and talk a bit more about those. So let's talk about setting indexes. So setting an index is something you'll do regularly because you want to create a reference point that is meaningful for you somewhere in the data. So a good example of this is customer ID. Later on, we're looking at keyword stuff, so maybe we would use the keyword as the index. But essentially, you want to create your own ID so you can chop and move around the data in a way that is meaningful to you. You'll also see us set indexes for time series data later on, because that allows us to chart easier, having the index running across the bottom and all the data points related to each day scattered across the top. So setting an index, if you're lucky enough to know what the data is before you import it, you would just do it at loading in the data. So if we look at if we go back to, let's say we're loading the data again from scratch. So we're going to ks.mb data equals pd, so that's calling the pandas module, and the specific aspect is the read CSV. Then we're putting in the location of the file again, what the separators are, and what the index column is going to be. Now I've just randomly picked by. Right. It's the person's name. I don't expect I don't expect it to be duplicated all the way through. So we're going to run that. We got no errors. That's good, because if it didn't want to set that index, then you would have got an error, or if you didn't write the right bit of syntax, you would have got an error. So you'll see the difference in the data when we call it again. So when we look at the head, and now you can see where before we had just like zeros, like a number indexed applied to the data frame by pandas. Now we have the by column that we set as the index, and that's going to be quite useful, potentially quite useful in this. I might be really wrong. I don't dive into Kickstarter data very often, but let's assume that Rob Thomas has only created one campaign, and we just want to see and everybody's ever only created one campaign. We want to see the performances against each individual. Setting the index this way would allow us to do that easier. That's essentially the first video. Now, it's taken a bit of time, but I've went really slowly to try explain the reading in aspect, and the header functions and the info and describe. And they're the first things you always do whenever you read in a data set. So it seems like really boring stuff. Yeah, it is. I mean, I remember when I first started, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to draw really cool graphs and do machine learning and just be like the boss. And then I quickly learned that that isn't going to happen. And you need to understand this stuff, as it's incredibly important for when you move down the line and you start hitting problems. If you don't understand how to investigate your data in a very simple form like this, you're going to have problems debugging any problems that you get. So a lot of problems there. It's not that many problems. So I just want to just show you a couple of extra important links, which are also in the video as well. But if you've watched this and you've not got the notebook yet, then head over to GitHub/Metatrix, github.com/Metatrix, and you'll be able to find this workbook. If you have any questions for this video, try post them in the video comment section so I can answer them. Any other questions? I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I'm probably going to be best on Instagram and Twitter, to be honest. So get me there. And once again, this is a community project. It's for everybody. Feedback. Tell me what you want to know. If I haven't explained something, ask. Or didn't explain something thoroughly, then ask away. If you know anybody who would be interested, share it, because this is only going to work with other people involved. So that's the first video. Looking forward to the feedback so I can get the second, third, and fourth done, and we'll release those over the next couple of weeks. All right. Speak to you all later. Ciao.